we were anticipating that that would be a long night, not expecting to see the Capitol actually under attack, and to have rioters there. And I think that that will, sadly be the lasting memory of the transition, despite the many continuities and that Martha referred to, of the sharing of information, particularly once the transition started on November 23rd, when the GSA administrator said, certified, or said that the election results had been confirmed unofficially. But I think that it's going to be a challenge for all of us as we kind of move past what we hadn't seen since the early 19th century.
I'm Susan Spurlock, Executive Director of Ford Hall Forum at Suffolk University. And I'm delighted to welcome you to this evening's program. I join my co-sponsors, the Political Science and Legal Studies Department at Suffolk University and GBH Forum Network, which is also our production partner, in welcoming you to our virtual spring 2021 lecture series number 46, examining the first 100 days of the Biden administration, a survey course for all. The lecture series continues this evening with building the team, staffing up, rebuilding capacity, and trust. It is now my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Christina Kulich, a faculty member in the Political Science and Legal Studies Department at Suffolk University and an organizer of this lecture series. Christina?
Thank you, Susan, and welcome everyone to the second edition of our spring series examining the Biden transition. The goal of today's class, and that's what this really is, it's a class, is to set up where we are now 2 weeks into the Biden administration, having navigated inauguration, and to talk to an excellent panel of experts about what's happening, what's going to happen, how the Biden transition stacks up or compares with transitions in the past, and to think forward about what the new Biden team will be able to do in order to accomplish what is a very, very ambitious agenda. Our panelists tonight are Martha Kumar from the White House Transition Project, Mina Bose, who is a presidential scholar at Hofstra University, Roger Fisk, who is a political strategist, an alumnus of 2 Obama administrations, and also a proud alum of Suffolk University, not once, but twice. So welcome, Roger, back home. And tonight's panel will be moderated by Stephanie Murray, who is the author of the Massachusetts POLITICO Playbook. So I'm going to toss the panel over to Stephanie, and everyone enjoy what will be an excellent conversation.
Thank you for that. Hello and welcome. Thank you to everyone joining us this evening. My name is Stephanie Murray. I'm a reporter at Politico based in Boston. I just want to start off by saying thank you to Suffolk University, GBH, and the Ford Hall Forum. It's a real treat to moderate this event, which is part of a new spring series focusing on developments in the Biden administration. So our focus tonight is on the first 100 days. The president, as you said, was inaugurated 2 weeks ago. So I think he's technically got 86 days left in that first 100. Time is already flying. And this presidential transition is playing out against a backdrop like no other. Over the course of 3 Wednesdays in January, we saw insurrection, impeachment, and the inauguration. So we have a really excellent lineup of superstar panelists to take you through the first 100 days. I see my role here as being a little bit invisible. My goal is to just get a great conversation going among our panelists. And if you don't wait for me to ask you a question, if you want to jump in and make a point, please feel welcome to do that. And at the halfway point, we will pass it over to some very smart students who have questions of their own. And if you're watching, please feel welcome to put your questions in the Q&A box as well. We'll try to get to as many as we can. But to start off, Mina, I'd like to turn to you first. Could you try to serve as an anchor for us here and talk a bit about the presidential transition process now and how it's evolved over time, how we've gotten here?
Sure. Well, thanks for having, first, let me just say thank you, Stephanie, for the question, and thanks to Suffolk University for hosting this lecture series. I'm really delighted to be here and to move past election conversations to governing conversations. I guess in some ways, though, discussing presidential transitions bridges both because the transition period from election day, about roughly 11 weeks from election day to inauguration day of January 20th, is a fairly short period of time. And it's been that way since 1937. The 20th Amendment moved inauguration day from March 4th to January 20th. And Franklin Delano Roosevelt was the last president to be inaugurated in March. In his second term, he was inaugurated in January. A lot has to happen in that time. And I guess I would just say, I was kind of thinking about what are the most important points I would like to make is that the transition period is critical for a peaceful, right, for providing information and ensuring a smooth transfer of power. The Biden administration, as I know we're going to discuss, or the Biden transition team, I should say, did a highly impressive degree of work to make nominations, have people in place to get going on inauguration day in what was a very contentious and difficult transition period. And I guess the third point I would make is that the consequences of the breaking of norms that we saw in the 2020-21 transition, the breaking of laws as we saw on January 6th, sadly. Those have consequences for governance. And I think we have seen contentious transitions, not contentious, but maybe difficult transitions in the past. In 1953, when Dwight D. Eisenhower was inaugurated, he and outgoing President Harry Truman were barely on speaking terms. They were, although Eisenhower had worked for President Truman, was the first Supreme Allied Commander of NATO appointed by President Truman, Eisenhower decided to run for president in 1952 because he was concerned about Truman's management of the Korean War, which was in a stalemate, and was also concerned about rising budget deficits. Their relationship had become so bitter. Truman didn't run in 1952, but they made comments about Eisenhower not knowing anything about politics. Eisenhower was very critical of Truman. Eisenhower wouldn't even go into the White House on the morning of the inauguration in 1953 for the kind of traditional cup of coffee. Nevertheless, there they are, heading to the inauguration, right? There are numerous other examples. I don't want to take up too much time here, but there are traditions that we see. It actually started with Ronald Reagan of leaving a note for his vice president, George H.W. Bush, who then was president in 1989. Every president since then, that's become a tradition. We see images of the former presidents and the current president, the importance of continuity and of a peaceful kind of a recognition, whether it is particularly in a cross-party transition, that there are common principles and values that unite the candidates. This picture here is from the funeral service for Barbara Bush in the spring of 2018. And it's an interesting story. The photographer was kind of knew that the former presidents would cluster together and was waiting and caught this moment. You see, of course, at the time, First Lady Melania Trump is in the photo. President Trump was not in the photo. The White House said that was for security reasons. Not really clear, but nevertheless, it is another illustration here. I think you see a certain collegiality among all of the former presidents until you come to the Trump presidency. This picture is from the funeral of George H.W. Bush in December of 2018. As you can see, it's not a posed photo. But there was actually, after this photo, there was quite a bit of controversy. President Trump said that all former presidents had said they supported his decisions on building a border wall, and in fact, then they all said that they hadn't. And to bring it back to your question, Stephanie, we see a number of ways in which norms were not followed and in the 2020-21 transition, the transition from Trump to Biden. And that is consequential. It complicates the path to governance for a new administration. So I'll stop there.
That is the perfect segue. My next question is for Martha. Under these kind of unusual circumstances, as the director of the White House Transition Project, I think you're the perfect person to talk about this. Can you talk about kind of just the job that Biden had to do to fill up this administration? And has he done a good job? And how do you even judge whether, all of these things are in the right place and ready to go?
Well, there are many different aspects of this. The number of jobs, the policies that you set out, and the transition structure that you develop. And there are, say, around 4,000 jobs that a president can fill, but you obviously are going to focus on the leading ones, which are ones that have Senate confirmation. And of those, he that would be the department secretaries and some of the undersecretaries. And in Biden's case, he announced 52 appointees for Senate confirmation, and that's before the inauguration, and that compares with 29 for Trump, 42 for Obama, and 20 for George W. Bush. So even though he had a truncated transition of about 77 days, I mean, not 77, 57 days. 77 is what you normally have, and he had about 57. So in spite of that, he had the Senate confirmations ready to go. And then they filled up their White House, starting with the White House. As far as your appointments is concerned, it's important because the White House staff are your decision making structure. And before you start making decisions on who you want to appoint, you want to have a White House structure in place. And he had named almost 200 people for his White House. And that includes filling out the 25 positions of assistant to the president, which is the top leadership team, and his deputy assistants to the president, who were the support staff there. So when you look down into each of the offices, whether it's the National Economic Council, the National Security Council, domestic policy as well, or the communications operations, those positions were filled before they came into the White House. So that meant that they could start rolling out their agenda. And it's important to start out strong because you want to show your brand of leadership. The public is interested and they have goodwill for the person coming in. So, for example, if you look at the Gallup polls for the first the period of around the inauguration, and how did the transition go, and the public in looking at Biden's performance, it was 64% positive. In looking at Trump's, it was 29% positive. And so Biden, during that time between the election and the inauguration, caught the public's attention and rolled out his policy agenda. One of the things that can make a transition successful is if the president has the president elect during the campaign has focused on key issues that are his priority and then explains what his positions are. What is the problem, like with the pandemic? And there, what did they need to do? They needed to get distribution. First of all, they needed to know um, uh, what was the status of the vaccines, what was the stockpile, because shortly before, just a couple of days before they came in, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Secretary Azar, said that they really didn't keep back second doses. And so the vaccine stockpile, which we still don't know how much it adds up to, but it was much smaller than they anticipated. But in his campaign, Biden focused on the pandemic, number one, the economy, number two, um, racial justice, number three, and then climate change. And so when he came in, those were the issues that he focused on in his discussion of what he was going to do in the kinds of executive orders that he has issued. He has issued more executive orders and executive actions than previous presidents have. But they thought it was very important, coming off of the Trump administration that had issued a lot of memoranda and executive orders, that they wanted to roll back a lot of those. So they had an operation that started really in the spring. The way the transition law works is that the federal government has a framework for transitions. 6 months before the election, the White House has to set up a White House Transition Coordinating Council that establishes transition policy, and then an agency transition directors council, which is made up of career people, representatives of each of the 15 departments and around 7 of the agencies, such as the National Archives or the Office of Government Ethics, that have a stake in the transition. And so then the Agency Transition Directors Council puts together information that is going to be important for the incoming administration on the programs in all of the departments, the budgets, the hot issues, the calendars the secretaries will have to work on. Because remember that a president is jumping on a moving train when he comes into office, because the government is in operation and you want to affect it as soon as you can.
So, one of the most fast-paced and exciting parts of the presidency is those first 100 days. And Roger, you are somebody who's kind of our eyes and ears on the inside of the Obama administration. I'm thinking about all of the students who are watching tonight, kind of wondering what it's like to be inside administration at this point, and kind of how you get there, how you go from a student to working in the White House. So can you talk to us a little bit about what your life was like during the Obama transition and first 100 days?
Of course, Stephanie, thanks for the question. And thank you to Martha and Mina and Suffolk University, Ford Hall Forum, and WGBH for having us, and specifically for having me. I come to this conversation as a practitioner, as a kid from the Merrimack Valley who started at Bunker Hill Community College and transferred to Suffolk. I started interning for John Kerry, actually, and basically grew up throughout my 20s working for him, and then did about 15 states in his presidential campaign. So the shortest answer possible, I look at this through fundamentally a campaign lens. And by that, I mean, working a campaign, trying to find some place where you can kind of fit in the culture, where you can feel comfortable advocating for the things that you care deeply about, share a vision of America's future with a candidate, and ideally get in early, because it's the people that get in early that Martha mentioned. Jen Psaki in one of our conversations before the program, she was, for example, the press secretary in Iowa, right? I started in January of 2007, and I worked in 25 states just in 2007 before you even get to the general election. So for me, similar to working in John Kerry's staff, I was always pretty much right at the intersection of strategy and implementation. So whenever anything went from kind of the boardroom and the decision makers to then being kind of implemented, and for example, the low dollar rallies that Obama did that were also open press that created our generations of small dollar donors, that was then handed to me to then go design and build and staff and promote and measure and things like that. So to then take that and bring us up to where this discussion is, the best advice I can give to students out there is to find a campaign and find a candidate that you feel like you can give all of yourself to, and then just get involved deeply. I think everyone, no matter what they end up doing in life, should probably work at least one or two campaigns in the course of their life, maybe not even presidential, but even local or something like that, to speak specifically about, so you work for a campaign and then you win. There's two avenues that confront you as staff immediately after the victory. You either work the inauguration or you work the transition. I went the inauguration route because I didn't necessarily know any better. If I could do it over, I would probably recommend that people work the transition, but at the time, I don't know that I would have added much value to that because I didn't know then what I know now. I was in charge of the cabinet for the first Obama inauguration, so I had 22 military escort teams under me, and that really gave me a really cool look. So I was, there was 22 people that are cabinet or cabinet level. The chief of staff, for example, is cabinet level, that I got to see the very first kind of steps of them, not only as individuals, but watching them kind of come together as kind of a team. And then I made it clear after the inauguration that I wanted to serve, and I was fortunate by virtue of joining in January of 2007 that it wasn't a situation that I necessarily had to lobby for. I basically had to just stay right at that intersection of policy and implementation where I had been kind of all along, and lo and behold, I was asked to take a position that focused on trade and diplomatic missions. So I used to run around Massachusetts for John Kerry. I ran around America for the Obama campaign. And then I got to run around the world and put together some of the cabinet attendance at the global climate change conferences, a lot of trade missions through China and India. And to me, it was all very similar to how I actually kind of started, but that's the best. I know we don't have a lot of time here and I want to respect our other guests here, but I look at this fundamentally as a gateway to this as working on a campaign. The other route, just to speak about it very briefly, Martha talked about the cabinet secretaries and the deputy secretaries and undersecretaries. Those will roughly be experts, or they'll be leaders of a particular constituency. They'll be governors, things like that. When I was at the Department of Commerce, the bureau heads that we got, for the U.S. Patent and Trade Office, for example, that drives our intellectual property and a lot of our competitiveness in the global marketplace, we got the CEO of Hewlett-Packard. Like, these are big deal people that take either leave from tenured positions at universities, they leave CEOs at corporations and join for 3 or 4 years. I can't shed any more light on the expert route than that because I can't present myself as an expert in that way. But those are kind of two of the routes that I've seen people take to serving in an administration.
Roger, I have to tell you, I'm from the Merrimack Valley too, which is why I think we get along. I just wanted to give everybody a reminder that if you have a question that you'd like to put in the chat, I've seen a lot come in, so keep doing that and we'll move over to questions in just a little bit. But my next question is for Martha, and what are some of the new or reimagined positions in the Biden administration that you have your eye on? I'm thinking about, John Kerry, the special presidential envoy for climate. So what are some of those new positions and what do they mean about where the administration is headed?
Well, one of the difficulties for a new administration is that they have to spend a lot of time on the confirmation process for their cabinet secretaries. For example, at this point, you have 4 cabinets, let's see, 5 cabinet secretaries plus one person who is at the cabinet level, Avril Haines. But it takes some while to get them through, plus their deputies, many of which have already been announced. But during that time, when you want to get a strong start, you use the White House and people in the White House. So if you have people that don't require Senate confirmation, then that would be John Kerry is appointed to a new climate position, because you can create whatever structure you want in a White House. You don't have to have any of the same people if you don't want. Actually, there about 30% of the employees in a White House actually do um, come from the past administration, like all the resident staff and some of the people in the military office, the correspondence office. But otherwise, you come in and you could make whatever changes you want as to what offices you want to create. But when you look at the offices from one administration to another, the regular offices in a White House do go from one administration to another. They don't make changes. So they keep the offices that there have been, but then what they can do is create these special positions like czar position on climate, or they had them on healthcare in the Obama administration, and work policy right from the beginning, not have to wait for the confirmation of some of your officials, and then you can create councils. So one of the first um, uh, decisions that Biden made on the once he was president elect was in choosing a task force on the virus. And he has a task force now with the White House. He has one, and they report 3 days a week. They are doing Zoom sessions, and the public can hear and watch what it is that they're doing. So they don't have to wait around for for weeks in order for things to get going, because presidents recognize that you do have to get a fast start. And if you can do that organizationally by creating councils that have never existed before, or positions that haven't, then then you can get that fast start. And that's what they're trying to do.
Let's talk a little bit about who is in those positions. Mina, this question is for you. We were talking before the panel a little bit about the makeup of Biden's cabinet and the demographics of the people who are serving in it and in the administration more broadly. I think of Jen Psaki, who we mentioned earlier, Janet Yellen. There are a lot of women who are, very public-facing members of the administration. So, how is it looking so far, and what does it mean for the administration?
Well, I think as we've been discussing, and I think there's a chart that will be showing of the historic numbers. If you compare the Biden administration, the number of appointments of women, of people of color, obviously the vice president is elected, but nevertheless, right, this was highly significant, the election of Vice President Harris, her selection as the vice presidential nominee, and of course, inauguration. What we're seeing is a very conscious plan by the Biden transition team and the Biden administration to reflect the demographic diversity of the United States, and it's significant when you look at the Council of Economic Advisors, the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, the Director of National Intelligence, the number of positions in which the Secretary of the Treasury, Janet Yellen, right? Avril Haines, the Director of National Intelligence. The importance, I think, of recognizing that the president's the constituents who supported Biden are being recognized, right? And that there is attention to demographic diversity as well as ideological diversity within the Democratic Party.
I mean, if you just look at the people who have been confirmed by the Senate, yesterday Alejandro Mayorkas was confirmed, and in his case, he comes from Cuba. Peter Buttigieg is a transportation secretary, and he is the first gay cabinet member. Lloyd Austin, as defense secretary, is the first Black secretary of defense. Janet Yellen, the first woman to be in the Treasury Department. Avril Haines, as Mina was saying, is the first woman to hold that position. And then Tony Blinken is for the Secretary of State. Is the only one here who is not a first. And one of the interesting things about it, when you look at the votes that they got, Haynes, Blinken, Yellen, Austin, Buttigieg, all of them got at least 78 positive votes. So there was a coming together, a consensus that these were good candidates. Mayorkas got through 56-43. But if you think of the Senate as being 50-50, it was a strong support that these secretaries have. Haynes was 84-10, Blinken 78-22, Yellen 84-15, Lloyd Austin 93-2, Buttigieg 83-13. So they've come in well, and I think there's a general recognition of the importance of having people with the broad backgrounds, and the Republicans recognized it as well as the Democrats.
That leads me to my next question. This one is for Roger. I've heard over the last couple of weeks and months just kind of relief from my Democratic sources who are seeing these cabinet and administration picks, especially the folks who have served in their jobs before, maybe as the deputy at an agency they're now in charge of, many of them under the Obama administration. So Roger, how similar can we expect the next 4 years to be to the Obama administration? You know, what are some of the common threads and similarities you see coming, and what are some of the differences?
I think the similarities will be in the broader kind of atmospherics, right? You're going to see, for example, the United States rejoin the JCPOA as it relates to the Iranian nuclear program. Europe has changed quite a bit in the 4 years. We're at the sunset of Merkel's tenure, and Macron's role in France has changed quite a bit. So we need to reintegrate ourselves into that. The Paris Climate Accords, those kind of things that were basically efforts that span 10, 15, 20 years. But even in 2012, we were very aware that we couldn't run the 2008 race, right? You can't look back on these things and think that it's just a question of kind of summoning the band back together. I think the Biden administration, and to build on the points of my colleagues here on the panel, specifically about appointments and hiring, know that they need to put a very unique stamp. You want to reach back and tap into some of that expertise. Obviously, Ron Klain dealt with the Zika virus and any number of other things in the context of the Obama administration. And they were also ticket mates, right? So you can't just expect that we can fundamentally just chop off the Obama part of Obama-Biden and think that there's not going to be some overlap into Biden-Harris. So I think they're doing a great job of threading that, which is it looks and sounds and feels new. I think it is new, both in perception and reality, but they're also cognizant of all of the challenges that you already mentioned. The staggered transition by virtue of the reluctance of the predecessor. We haven't even gotten to necessarily impeachment yet, but that's going to be throwing a wrench in virtually everything. that you want to have some level of expertise, because if everyone is just learning, how to get in and out of the building and where the bathrooms are and stuff, that can literally consume, a couple weeks, a couple months to really get the lay of the land of your new job. And as we've seen, there's not a lot of things that the Trump administration and the Obama administration share. One thing that they do share is that they're largely defined by what they both achieved in their first 2 years. And the first 2 years are largely driven by the tone and the substance of the first 100 days. And so the Biden folks were somewhat crippled coming out of the box by virtue of the staggered transition. They have a number of hurdles in front of them as it relates to the Senate, specifically, to be very specific about the Senate approved positions that Martha is talking about. But definitely making a new clear statement about the look and feel of the Biden team and vision, while tapping some of that expertise so they can make the whole thing work.
So we have a few minutes before we move to our Q&A portion of the evening. So if you have any questions, please feel welcome to put them into the chat. We'll get to as many as we can. My last question for the three of you is going to be the same for everyone. Choose one cabinet nominee or cabinet member, if they've already been confirmed, who stands out to you, someone who we should keep an eye on over the next 100 days, for the students, for reporters, just for people in the general audience. Who's someone to watch? And let's start with Mina first.
Oh man, I was hoping I'd get a second on that one. Because okay, that's fine. I'll go first. I'm going to say that I'm curious to see. We're still waiting for the confirmation of Neera Tanden for the Office of Management and Budget, and I think that is a very significant appointment. Obviously, the OMB sets. Works with the White House to set the administrations to put the policy priorities into legislation, right? What is financially feasible? OMB also oversees regulations, executive orders. We're seeing a lot of that right now, more so than any president since I think FDR. The number of executive actions in the past 2 weeks, and so I think that the role that OMB will play in the Biden administration to enact, to ensure that the vaccination plan moves forward. And I see there are a number of questions in the chat about that, right? Pandemic response, the plans for climate change, economic stability, race relations, how we address it, right? That really, and that's a topic that really a challenge that underlies all of these areas that we've been talking about. Haven't even gotten to healthcare, right, which will probably be upheld by the Supreme Court. Nevertheless, the 2017 tax cuts law that basically made zeroed out the penalty for the individual mandate. There are a number of pressing economic priorities that have to be addressed, and that the Biden administration will have to address with the fiscal year 2022 budget. We'll start to see directions for that with the State of the Union message on February 23rd, and I would say the OMB director will play a significant part in that. So that's why I'm looking. Tanden is still awaiting Senate confirmation, but that's the one I would point to.
All right, let's toss it to Martha next. Who's somebody you have your eye on?
Well, in the confirmation process here, you could have your eye on all of them for one thing or another. Janet Yellen as the first woman as Secretary of the Treasury. I'm particularly interested in her. She has a very strong background from the past, being the chair of the Fed, and being highly respected by both Democrats and Republicans as she comes into this position, and whether she can hold the kind of support that she has had. And she's going to be key to the rollout of their economic program. Tony Blinken, I'll just put in a couple of other things I'm looking at. Tony Blinken, as Secretary of State, is going to be in charge of trying to repair our alliances, starting with Europe. And so he will be good to watch to see his traveling around the world and how successful he is in convincing our allies that actually we can be relied upon to support them. And one of the things that's been interesting that's come up in the press secretary's briefings is whether the president has talked to President Xi of China, and he has not. But the Jen Psaki has emphasized that Biden wants to deal with all of our allies. And so he wants to go not just in when he talks to Xi, just on his own and just calling up and asking how things are. He is talking to everybody to get a consensus before he deals with them. And Tony Blinken is going to have to be important as a consensus builder as well. But there's something interesting about all of them.
Agree.
Roger, you're up.
I'll give you more than you asked for, but I'll try to do it very quickly. I'm fascinated by the Beacon Hill Dorchester axis of John Kerry and Gina McCarthy. I think that is really, really interesting. Very quickly about John Kerry. It's funny how life works out, right? If John Kerry had won in 2004, there wouldn't have been an Obama, right? But at the same time, I think him ending up being Secretary of State was at the time exactly where he should be. And now focusing on global climate change is, again, exactly where he should be. So sometimes maybe winning is not necessarily the path to get one where one should be. And then last, I'm very, very interested and curious about what portfolio the vice president is going to end up with, because normally one segment I'm going to assume most folks here know that former Vice President Biden, his main job was to corral votes for the Stimulus Act and keep the Democrats in line with Obamacare and things like that. She's going to need some kind of specific portfolio, and it'll be very interesting to see what that is. And it'll be also very interesting to see what that is and what that tells us about their plans as it relates to 2024 and more specifically her plans.
It's also interesting. I mean, we could just use like another hour just to get into all of those folks you just mentioned. But at this point, I think it's time to pass it over to the students. We'll go to Rayan first. So if you'd just like to introduce yourself, say a few things and ask your question, go ahead.
Sure. Hi. Thank you, Stephanie. My name is Rayan Hamza. I'm a senior at Suffolk University. I want to thank all of our panelists for being here today to give their unique insight on these topics. My question is for Dr. Mina Bose. President Biden has evidently given priority to those with deep government experience. In your opinion, is this the easier pathway to success? On the other hand, are there any drawbacks to this approach? How well do you think old experience will fare against today's modern issues?
Ryan, that's an excellent question. And, we could talk about this for a while with several of the cabinet appointments and actually with President Biden himself as someone who is a career politician from the career in the Senate and then the vice presidency and 4 years out of office and now the presidency. I would say that what you're seeing in the Biden administration reflects both the president's own political career and the importance of expertise, of understanding national politics and working in Washington, and then of course bringing in advisors with state level experience as well, but the ability to be conversant in how Washington runs. And I would say that is really not just the president's own, reflecting his own background, but a direct reaction to the previous administration, where the Trump administration, actually Donald Trump really campaigned on a platform of breaking tradition, breaking the norms in Washington, I'm trying to reduce the size of government, right? Kind of an unfortunate metaphor that he used that, right, I won't repeat here, but right, but that was part of the platform. And indeed, if you go back and look at Trump's inaugural address, he talks about giving power back to the people, right? Taking it away from Washington. So I think this is really a conscious strategy reflecting not just the president's own expertise, but a real a desire to return to both governing expertise and substantive expertise. And I would say that when we get into the pandemic, if we wanted to talk about the pandemic, we see it there as well, with the focus on science, evidence-based action. But I'll hold on. I'll stop there. Great question.
From there, I will pass it to Megan.
Hi, thank you. My name is Megan. I'm a junior at Suffolk University, and I thank you all for being here. My question today is for Mr. Fisk. So as someone with a deep background in global communication and former international media coordinator for President Obama, how do you feel President Trump's media coverage impacted global image? And if you could, how would you advise the Biden administration in order to counteract some of that damage?
I'll answer this as, first off, thank you so much for the question. I'll answer this analytically rather than partisanly, if that's even a word. Let's first talk about the structure or the method by which the former president communicated, which was essentially in a first person voice. It's interesting, just recently, Lieutenant Colonel Kirby was brought back to the State Department as the spokesperson, who had been a spokesperson in the Navy and basically had grown up doing that and had played that role for the second Obama administration. And my point in that is that the traditional approach is more to have the White House set the tone and the direction for the cabinet departments and things like that, but then to give them basically the room to communicate on their own as the State Department, as the Treasury, but also obviously maintaining the right to, when appropriate, to speak as one unified government. But when you get into a lot of these granular issues, especially on the global stage, sometimes it's best, and even if you want to empower a particular person to truly represent the United States, it's best to then truly delegate them and empower them to kind of do that. One of the things that I found very odd with the previous administration, I remember specifically one time when the former Vice President Pence was actually landing in South Korea for a set of talks at the very beginning of when that was a priority for the Trump administration. And as he landed, the former president sent out a tweet that basically undercut and dispelled any notions that there was ever even a reason for the negotiations to begin. So what you ended up with in a couple different situations was the former president was saying things that were fundamentally at odds with the stated policy of the government that he ran. And since he took kind of a very episodic and circumstantial and transactional approach to how he communicated about these things, one, he would go and often do that and contradict the policy of the government. And then two, he would often contradict himself within a day or 2 days or 3 days. And there's not a lot of things that, like, both our allies and our markets and our institutions reward or that they share in the act of rewarding. But one of them is some kind of dependability, some kind of reliability, which is, if I say to you today that 2 + 2 is 4, I want you to feel confident that that's the same thing I'm going to say next week and a month from now and 2 quarters from now, so that you and I can then have a framework and an understanding upon which then we can start to work out whatever issue it is, be it protection of American intellectual property, trying to increase, our nation's exports to markets around the world, et cetera. When our trading partners and when our allies and even our foes, our competitors, think that there is no fixed policy and that everything is just kind of on a minute by minute, day by day, episodic basis, then that really cripples our ability to make progress in our trade relationship with China, help some of these emerging economies that are realizing that it's in their interest to clean up their air and their water, all of these things that are pretty difficult and complex. And so that's a frustration that I kind of found with the prior administration, because, you know, when you have 2 and 3 messages coming out from a government, then that allows both our allies and our competitors to kind of pick through that and pick the message or the stance that is most advantageous to them, and then go ahead and act on it. As you saw, and just to give one example, to stick with the South Korean example, the former president suspended our military exercises with South Korea in the course of his negotiations with North Korea, that was in complete contradiction to our agreements with NATO and any number of other people. And he basically gave that away for nothing, just out of an impulse, without anything coming back. And so those are the kind of things that I think unnerve our markets. You could see the stock market behave differently when the former president would say he was going to be meeting with Congress, and then he would only meet with Republicans, and you could see the markets go back down. There's real life consequences to these things. And so that's why that's just one example, or a series of examples of how I think things will be different. I think you'll see a much more methodical, disciplined, harmonic, cohesive narrative that comes out of the Biden administration, and then empowering the cabinet secretaries and other folks to go off and have some room to kind of personalize their interactions as they work towards closing deals and whatever. But there'll never be, ideally, any doubt about, you know, where the government stands on Monday or Wednesday or January or August or September. So those, I think, are both the structural and the content kind of differences that we're going to see.
Thank you for that, Roger and Megan. And we'll go to our third and final student question of the night. Anthony, take it away.
All right, thank you so much, Stephanie. And before I start, I want to reiterate my thanks to all the panelists for being here and answering our questions and taking the time to talk with us. My name is Anthony Coviello. I'm a freshman at Suffolk University. I'm majoring in political science with a focus in law and public policy. And my question is going to be for Professor Kumar. This past transition has been anything but traditional and peaceful, and the Biden team has had the tall task of carrying it out without cooperation from the past administration. And I have 2 questions off of this. Firstly, what will be the consequences of this for the Biden administration moving forward in the next 4 years? And secondly, how will this affect presidential transitions in the future moving forward in America?
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for your question. I would say the first off, when you say no cooperation from the previous administration, in fact, the laws do require that the government pull together the information, the Agency Transition Directors Council that I talked about. And all of that information was put together. The career people in government were very interested in helping the new administration and getting to the point where they could not only provide the information, but also talk to the incoming appointees in the departments and agencies so they could give them information. So the laws, I think, were very important in this transition, because without them, you would not have had that the kind of information. But it's true, you did not have the cooperation. At the same time, because Biden had a campaign that was focused on governing rather than just campaigning on whatever issues seem to be popular at the moment. I think that he has a public that knows what he's thinking and is supportive of his organization and his quick start and his use of all of his appointees, his cabinet members. They start in the morning. You might find Ron Klain going, or in the evening as well. Ron Klain and Jen Psaki. Ron Klain is the chief of staff. who has great communications experience, and Jen Psaki does as well. They go out and talk about what's happening with the administration. Then you have the task force coming out 3 times a week and also talking about what they're doing and what they want the public to know. So I think that they have given a sense of coordination and a sense that they know what they're doing and where they're going. Um, and and I think part of how that came about was because they pulled people with experience. And there's certain kinds of experience that make a White House, but also an administration function well. Having people who know the president and how the president likes to make decisions. Tony Blinken and Ron Klain worked for uh, worked for Biden when he was in the Senate and on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. You have to have, so they know what he's interested in, how he likes to have information, and how much information he wants before making a decision. You need people who know the campaign. Why are you there in the first place? And he's been able to bring those in. People who also know a White House, because the White Houses are more similar than they are different from one administration to another. So bringing people in there, they know where all the levers are, what the relationships are with the departments and how they can affect that. And then having people who know the Washington community. And that's certainly, in a way, you see Ron Klain checks off every box, but he's brought a lot of people in there too. So they have a good sense of where they're going, and you can see the coordination. The president isn't the only one speaking. There are many voices there are, and the voices are well coordinated. And so I think in that way he has gotten off to a good start in spite of the roadblocks that Trump set up. But one of the things that you'll notice in their communications in dealing with the Trump administration and what they left behind is they never talk about it. They talk about what's going forward, positive, what their plans are, and it's rare for them to complain on the record anyway. And Biden doesn't do that. And if you listen to Jen Psaki's briefings, I don't think she's mentioned the name Trump since, and she's had, I think now today was the 12th briefing, and she's never used the word Trump. Past administration, but their eye is on the future, and they did that during the transition, and they're doing that in governing. Talk about where you're going, not what was there before you.
So that'll do it for our student questions. Thanks so much to Ryan, Megan, and Anthony for those. They were great. And we're going to move to the audience Q&A now. We have a few minutes left. Thank you to our panelists, by the way. We are like running perfect on time, so I appreciate it. Our first question is from Abby, and this goes to Mina. As an educator, how do you anticipate the history books will portray the events of this presidential transition, particularly January 6th? And I just love this question. What would you title this year?
Yeah, Stephanie, that's an excellent question. I was thinking about that, and I'm not sure that I have a title yet. I think we're still waiting to see this year what happens, right? When we vaccine distribution, when we begin to be able to return to some of the economic, social activity, travel. I would say it's too soon to say what 2021 will be. 2020 was certainly shock, chaos, and 2021 started with uh, the unbelievable uh, kind of shock of seeing the attack on the Capitol and what was supposed to be a procedural day, certainly substantive, because that is constitutional to have the certification of the Electoral College vote. And we were anticipating that that would be a long night, not expecting to see the Capitol actually under attack, and have rioters there. And I think that that will, sadly be the lasting memory of the transition, despite the many continuities and that Martha referred to, of the sharing of information, particularly once the transition started on November 23rd, when the GSA administrator said, certified or said that the election results had been confirmed unofficially. But I think that it's going to be a challenge for all of us as we kind of move past what we hadn't seen since the early 19th century. And I feel like I can't, I can't, I don't want to, I can't stress this enough, because it's a real challenge as we think about not just titles but images, right? How do we remember this day? How do we discuss this day? I've changed the way I had to rethink the way I teach presidential transitions and the meaning of the inauguration and unity. President Biden said that, right? The theme of that speech was unity. How do you get from the rhetoric to the practice? So I know that's not a complete answer to the question, but some of the efforts to try to put this into the last year, the transition, and what was a very shocking start to 2021. Hopefully, it will improve from there.
Our next question is to all the panelists or whoever would like to answer it. And this comes from Gina. And the question is, how long until we begin to see some changes? How long does it take to implement change, especially in this environment? And how can we ensure that we're headed in the right direction?
Well, what kind of change? I mean, you're going to have some legislative changes about transition if you're thinking on transition. The history of transition legislation has been, let's see how it works, and if there are problems, let's do fixes. And I think we've seen problems in this transition, and I think there will be changes. There will be fixes to it. But as far as change in how the vaccines are going to work, that whole program, I think we're beginning to see that as well, because in Trump's case, he basically washed his hands of it and left it to governors to do whatever they wanted, and then stick to his mantra that that it's going to disappear. And Biden clearly is taking the opposite approach and taking a strong federal hand, making decisions such as wearing masks on any federal property, in airports, on airplanes, anything that's involved in interstate commerce where the federal government can have it stamped as you have to wear a mask. So you're seeing some federal control, trying to find out, okay, if the Trump people didn't know how many vaccines they had in the stockpile, get that information. Let's make the policy and let's work with science. I mean, science has been a big part of what he has talked about, whether it's the vaccine or any climate, other kinds of issues. He has made certain that that stamp is there, and it's in his policies, but it's in his appointments. So you see the change first in appointments, in who he's brought in and the experiences they have. So I think we'll see change there. In the executive orders, of which he has, I think it's over 50, which is more than any other president has had. But he's trying to change what kinds of decisions that Trump had made. That it will take a while for many of those. Some of them are not self-enforcing, but I think you have to look first at appointments and then at policy proposals, and then you can see implementation.
I'm going to try to combine two questions here for the next one. So the first question is from Bronwyn, and it is, there has been a lot of talk about Senator Joe Manchin and his influence on Biden's proposed plans on climate change and COVID relief. So how do you think that the Biden administration is going to tackle more moderate Democrats when it comes to these big sweeping plans? How will he build bipartisanship? And then the second question is from RJ, and it is, how do you see the budget reconciliation process, and has it expanded the powers of the president? And so this can go to anybody or a few people on the panel.
I'll take a swing at that. The interesting thing about the Manchin question, we desperately need a center. The center is always vilified by the extremes of both sides. But overall, the American trajectory is largely determined by folks between the 40-yard lines, the kind of center left and center right. The issues that they decide on are largely defined by the extremes. It's a very, very interesting interplay. Specific to Mr. Manchin and West Virginia, it's interesting to watch not necessarily what people say, but what they do. And the reason I say that is that the coal industry is already transitioning. There's, for example, in Kentucky, there's an organization, one of the biggest coal producers there is called Enerblue. They're already retraining their workforce for retrofitted plants, basically preparing for a post-coal, or at least a transition from coal environment. The other interesting thing, because I've read up on this quite a bit, is coal production went down by 15 gigawatts in the course of the Obama administration. It actually went down by 20 gigawatts in the course of just one term of President Trump. So coal production was a net decrease under the previous administration, which I think actually has much more to do with the fact that the industry itself is deeply tuned into both the cultural trends, the geological kind of realities of what they're working on, and the fact that the market itself is transitioning. If you look back to the beginning of what we could loosely call the environmental movement, there's been something along the lines of $30 trillion spent globally differently than as if there was an absence of an environmental movement. And if you think now of how people spend their dollars, even in terms of like grocery shopping and things like that, all the way up into cars and everything else, there's almost an ingrained environmentalism in how we spend our money now. And the market knows that, obviously, and the coal industry knows that. So I think Mr. Manchin has to kind of straddle a much more delicate and complex balance than people might initially think, because not only is it just a question of like yesterday's industries and tomorrow industries, but yesterday's industries themselves are already reorienting and pivoting towards tomorrow, and he's got to be ahead of that change as well. But I think there's a way to do it. You have to look at retraining, and you have to not only do the policy of retraining, but really reinforce the optics of retraining. Try to put some numbers on the fact that X number of people have gotten retrained and are now employed at X, Y, and Z facility, and put it in a very kind of local kitchen table kind of way. To just talk about broad skill retraining doesn't necessarily get it done. So there is a way to get it done, but it's going to be very difficult and very complex.
And we just have a few minutes left. So one more question, and this is from Leslie, and it is, how is Washington, D.C. going to react to a shift from former President Trump's campaign style and his kind of self-directed governance approach back to a more organized and traditional approach, especially as Biden calls for unity?
I would say with a sigh of relief. See, he would, when he spoke, he would, may have a teleprompter, but most of his political speeches, where he would speak for 90 minutes, he would riff a lot and talk about policy and what he was in favor of and what he wasn't, that would cause a lot of problems for people within the administration who are trying to develop or implement policy. So I think they need, you want to have a steady course and have a sense of where an administration is going. And I think that is that's something you're going to see in Biden, because Biden.
Oh, please go.
I was going to add that Richard Neustadt, who was a presidency scholar, but also a practitioner, he worked for Truman and worked in the Bureau of the Budget. He said that the presidency is no place for amateurs. And I think it's difficult to have a president who came in, as Trump did, with no elective experience whatsoever, and heading a company where there were no shareholders and he could do what he wanted. And he had no experience in sharing power. And that, I think, is tough to come into the presidency and expect that you're going to be able to do whatever you want to do, that you can make policy.
I guess if I could just add on that, because I agree, the Neustadt's point is excellent from presidential power, and I would say that we're seeing less chaos, and what that means, to kind of come back to an earlier question, is that now the question we're looking to see the results, right? How will the Biden administration? How will they make good on promises for the vaccinations, for the economic response? And I would just say, Stephanie, you had asked a question about reconciliation. It's certainly a tool I think that the Biden administration is likely to use to get the necessary kind of the stimulus relief, the COVID relief. They'll have an opportunity to do it again later this year as well. And I think that the expectation for action is high. And so I think that that will be a budget tool that is used if they're not able to find another means to get to pass the legislation that they need.
Roger, do you have anything to add before we wrap it up here?
No, just I won't even try to entertain the questions. It's because it's almost 7:15. But Stephanie, thank you so much, and thank you to the students out there and for the questions and everything. And just remember, no matter how frustrating this can all be, America isn't an answer; it's a question, and we all have a role in trying to answer it for ourselves. And that's why the words are in order to form a more perfect union. It's not to inherit a more perfect union or anything like that. We all have a role in forming it. And I hope that you've taken a little bit from our discussion here, and I'm available through the professors and everyone that you know here on the broadcast. But thank you so much for having me.
All right, and now we are headed towards the end of the program. I just want to say thank you so much to Martha, Mina, and Roger. And thank you to our students and members of the audience for your thoughtful questions. And of course, thank you to Suffolk University, the Ford Hall Forum, and GBH for making this possible. It's been my pleasure to serve as your host tonight. I wish you a good rest of your evening. And from there, I'll hand it over to Professor Kulich.
Thank you, Stephanie. This has been an excellent panel. I want to add to the chorus of thanks. This has been a superb discussion, which has really helped to tee up what we're going to be doing in this class for the rest of the semester, which is to begin to dig into the policy areas and issues and see what the Biden administration and the new team that is still being put in place is going to be able to do. So thank you again for joining us.